Hello everyone, my name is Gabrian, and today I'm going to be talking about my subject for the literary analysis that I decided to do for my project, which is the state of L2 motivation in Japanese EFL classrooms. So I want to start off with listing my research questions. So previous studies that we've looked at in this class mainly just deal with, L2 motivation, and it's not really specific to how different cultures can have an effect on this motivation. And so with that said, I hope to try to get an understanding of what general perceptions Japanese students have at various educational levels like middle school, high school, entering college, what kind of perception these students have toward learning English, what factors influence their motivation or demotivation, how are these factors linked to previously learned motivational theory that we've covered in the class, and also given these factors, trying to understand maybe if there are better frameworks to apply to the Japanese classroom than others, based on something that could be cultural or societal and just specific to Japan. Some reason for doing on this subject is because I was recently selected to be an alt through the JET program. So I really just want to know where my students are going to be coming from, learn what drives them, and what strategies will be most useful for me to be a successful alt. So the content I'm going to cover is just brief historical context, student perceptions, and relevant motivational theory, tentative questions, answers to questions, some tentative conclusions, further research and development, and references. So as for the historical context, which is largely cited from Fujimoto Adamson, I know there's a lot of dates here, but basically it's just covering from the fact that Japan was an isolated country for about 250 years, and then when English started to be introduced as a subject, also the fact that the audiolingual and grammar translation methods have existed in the country for roughly 100 years. That's been the way that they've been taught in the national curriculum and on entrance exam preparation. I'm moving through the war years into the more recent years and Japan's orientation to try to cultivate Japanese people who can communicate in English or languages other than Japanese. So I want to look at some authors that have wrote some works on the student perceptions that they observed in classrooms in Japan. Like these are all, these authors here are all teachers that have a lot of experience and to their views. Berwick and Ross notes that motivation hit its peak in the last year of high school. So it's really manifested in the need to pass entrance exams. And that once students get out of high school, they kind of experience this complete lack of motivation because all of their, the source of their instrumental motivation has essentially been removed. But it's interesting that as these students go through their freshman year of college, they start to either develop or not develop really concrete reasons for wanting to study English, and it becomes a little bit more intrinsic. McVeigh had a really interesting perspective. It's that students studying English in Japan view it as a simulacrum, which I might be butchering the pronunciation, but it's basically like a simulation. So English the students are learning basically has no relation to any reality. And the way that they view it also doesn't really have much of a relation to the way it's actually spoken by people. So it's basically fantasized, and it's a means of consuming otherness, which means anything other than what occurs in their daily lives. And there's this clash that occurs in the classroom between their fantasized version of English and the real English. I don't really want to go too much into this. It's a little bit abstract, a little bit deep for this presentation. So Ryan, 2009, has a lot of reference. He really relies on the L2 motivational self-system approach for trying to understand student motivation in Japan. He sees instrumental function as definitely outweighing communicative function in the English classrooms in Japan. And as I said, he sees that the L2 motivational self-systems are best for trying to understand student motivation regardless of what culture the studies being conducted in. Then Kikuchi, 2013, so this is more of a focus on the demotivation of students. And he interestingly points out, I don't know if it's he or she, but interestingly points out that there's this disconnect between MEXT goals, which is basically like the Ministry of Education, and what's actually happening in classrooms. So grammar translation is being pushed heavily. Meanwhile, MEXT is having this English for Communicative Purposes initiative, and so there's this disconnect between those two realities that's basically causing this undercurrent of demotivation among students, being kind of disenfranchised by the system. That might be a little bit strong to say, but something like that. Also, motivation comes from the students while demotivation comes from the teachers. So motivation is based on students' own subjective thoughts, whereas the teachers are the ones who can control whether or not they're demotivated. I don't know if I completely agree with that, but that's just something that I found. So possible answers to my questions. So I think one of the biggest answers is, of course, instrumental motivation is definitely a driving force within the Japanese EFL classroom. Basically, students just want to pass entrance exams and they have to study English, so they do. You know, if English wasn't on the entrance exam, would they be studying English? Probably not. Also related to the view of McVeigh, I was wondering if it might be possible to apply this idea of imagined communities, which we've learned as a source of motivation for students to study English. So if we can, anyway, I'll talk about that a little bit later. Also, Kikuchi lists some of those demotivating factors, which I've explained earlier, such as the institutional goals not being consistent with what's happening in classrooms. Also that teachers might be the ones who are able to control whether or not a student becomes demotivated. And that motivation itself is subjective to their internal desires. Those are tentative conclusions that I've been able to draw are that making institutional policies more consistent would be ideal. However, as an alternate language teacher or a foreign English instructor in Japan, this might be next to impossible. It will just take time. However, I think there are opportunities where for students, especially foreign teachers to teach things like pronunciation, which kind of really steps outside of what students are being taught in their classrooms. However, it relates more to institutional goals, so it could possibly build upon a clear application of goal-oriented theory, because you have the goals there, but just not the means to achieve them. There's also this idea that the imagined communities that students have formed could be redirected into something more solid, using movies, TV, popular culture to try to enforce this idea of English as not just a subject, but as a real language that people are speaking. I think teachers can also do things like record their own conversations with friends and family to try to go beyond just teaching English in the classroom. I mean, using English in the classroom as a means to teach English. It's kind of like, it's kind of a pointless situation almost. It's like just doing it to do it, you know. Also, this idea that instrumental motivation could possibly be a product of one's own environment. So because students are needing to use English on the exams to pass the exams, and they're primarily studying to pass the exam, this could be affecting their own belief system, you know? Because English is not really being made into this fun subject, it's kind of taking away any possible source of intrinsic motivation they can derive. I mean, although their motivation is subject to their own beliefs, I think that their beliefs can possibly be subject to the L2 environment, the L2 experience. So if they're given a more variety, a greater variety of like activities or different kinds of lesson plans, it may be possible to kindle motivation other than that of instrumental within them. However, if it's a result of the culture and the history, this might not be the case, or some strategies might work better than others. So could go either way. As far as further research and development, I mean, honestly, I don't have anything specific listed here. I just know that I'd like to have more research into demotivation among students, probably more recent research. In general, I just need to probably read more things, try to draw out more ideas, and beyond that, I would really appreciate any suggestions that you have for me, any further questions that you have to help you clarify my topic for yourself. And with those questions, it would help me to clarify the topic as well, because admittedly it is a bit broad, and I think there's a lot of room for me to narrow it down to something that's a little bit more digestible, I guess you could say. Or if you think it's not that broad, then you can tell me that too, and I'd appreciate that as well. And then you can say what you liked or you didn't like. Either way, I'm open to whatever you have to say. So thank you so much for watching my presentation, and I look forward to watching yours. Also, here are my references, so you can see I drew my conclusions from reliable sources. Anyway, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.